All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Future of Food panel. We have a powerful and inspirational event planned tonight. We are so grateful you're here. My name is Goli Saba, and I'm a volunteer with 350 Sacramento and a family physician. We're so thrilled to have you join 350, our celebration of 10 years of collective climate action. I'd like to introduce to you my co-moderators today. First, Christy Hendrickson Perry. Christy is a board member and treasurer of 350 Sacramento and a healthcare administrator. She's been involved with 350 Sacramento for 10 years, so that must mean it's from the beginning. Also joining us is Toensmeier, our amazingly talented staff at 350 Sacramento. Tonight, he's our tech wizard who will be running everything behind the scenes, and we're grateful for his expertise. Prior to joining 350 Sacramento, he studied environmental studies at Sacramento State with an emphasis on restoration ecology. 350 Sacramento is a local grassroots organization committed to equitable solutions that accelerate the transition to a sustainable future with atmospheric carbon dioxide levels below 350 parts per million. We believe in a world with a safe climate where nature is respected and protected, and our social, political, and economic systems work for all people and the planet. Before we start, I wanted to mention some of our accomplishments briefly over the last 10 years. In 2014, we worked with a coalition of organizations to stop 7 100-car trains carrying Bakken crude oil and toxic tar sands oil coming through Sacramento each day. We've organized and trained 30 young people with our youth camp for climate action, many of whom are now great climate activists locally. We're also designing a youth climate curriculum to get students to start environmental programs in their schools. We've held multiple community forums to educate Sacramentans about the goal of carbon zero. In addition, most recently, 350 Sacramento served on the Governor's Commission on Climate Change for 2 years and now has a team to ensure that the adopted commission recommendations are followed through and sped up. So next, I wanted to, as we kick off this evening, I wanted to take a moment to have us honor and express gratitude for this land and the indigenous people who continue to be stewards of it. May we learn from our troubled history as a nation and move forward with peace and compassion for one another and our common home. We're so grateful to have Caressa Nguyen, who will offer a land acknowledgement. Caressa is an enrolled member of the Ion Band of Miwok Indians and also has Vietnamese and Filipino roots. She's passionate about building indigenous sovereignty that includes food sovereignty and the next economy. Caressa attended the Evergreen State College, focused on political ecology. She has studied climate change policy in Bolivia, Morocco, Peru, the US, Vietnam, and Nepal. She strives to work internationally on environmental issues and empowering indigenous peoples. She's preparing to launch a sustainable fashion line and has co-founded the nonprofit Sacred Lands, Native Hands to act as a bridge between current landholders and original caretakers of the land in efforts to reclaim indigenous lands. Thank you, Caressa, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Machixis Kanoyasit Crescenu and Mayonam Ionako. Hi, my name is Caressa and I'm Miwok from the Ion Band of Miwok Indians, and I ask that you take a moment to honor and acknowledge that many of us are on the ancestral homelands of the Miwok, Maidu, and Nisnon. Indigenous peoples have a long-standing history and connection to the land since time immemorial and are the original stewards of lands and waters. Many indigenous peoples have been forcibly exiled from their lands because of aggressive and persistent settler colonialism and US governmental policies, but have persevered. We make this acknowledgement to honor the Miwok, Maidu, and Nisnon, and especially the Woolton Rancheria Miwok, who are the only federally recognized tribe in Sacramento County as well as their ancestors and descendants in the land itself. Let's hear the teachings from today to make a better and more just tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Caressa, so much. And before we start with our speakers, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors. We're very grateful to these agencies, organizations, businesses, and individuals for their support and the work that they each do to create a safe climate future. We have SMUD as a climate rock star. Our climate heroes include Chrysalis Cosmetics, Sacramento Metro Air Quality Management District. Climate champions include an anonymous donor, Environmental Council of Sacramento, or Eakins, Council Member Eric Guerra, as well as Council Member Steve Hansen, Rosanna Herber, SMUD Director, Dave Tamayo as well, a SMUD Director, Save the American River Association, and we also have Borderlands Bakeries, California Solar and Storage Association, Clean Start, Environmental Student Organization at Sacramento State, Green Restaurants Alliance, Sacramento Grass or ReSoil, Mogavera Architects, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Brandon Rose, SMUD Director, Ward 1, Sacramento Dharma Center, Climate Sangha, Sacramento Native American Health Center, Heidi Sanborn, also a SMUD Director, Solar Rights Alliance, Sunrise Movement Sacramento, Therapists for Social Responsibility, Hal Thomas, United Nations Association of the USA, Sacramento Chapter, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILF. Okay. All right, so as you can see, our distinguished panelists, while we work to bring about the rapid elimination of fossil fuels in the next decade to prevent global temperature rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius, we are excited to share the potential of the currently existing solutions that regenerative agriculture and sustainable food practices can offer. At this moment, we want to take the opportunity to reimagine our food system, or perhaps unlearn the industrial agriculture system that has brought about worldwide epidemics of obesity, malnutrition, and other chronic diseases. This system has also led to the widespread pollution of soils and watersheds, drastic erosion of topsoil, deforestation, and rendered many farmlands devoid of soil microorganisms. Through the practices our speakers will outline tonight, we want to highlight how our relationships to food, to our communities, and to the biosphere can be restored simultaneously with practices that also sequester vast amounts of atmospheric carbon. So I'm going to introduce Christy for the next part of this panel. Christy.
Thank you, Golly.
Sure.
As you can see, we have a spectacular lineup of speakers. Our first speaker is Adae Romero-Briones. Adae is the Director of Programs at the Native Agriculture and Food Systems with First Nations Development Institute, the most highly rated American Indian nonprofit in the nation. A U.S. Fulbright scholar, Adae received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Policy from Princeton University and received a law doctorate from Arizona State University's College of Law, in addition to her master's in law degree in food and agricultural law from the University of Arkansas. She has written extensively about food safety, the produce safety rules in tribes, and the protection of tribal traditional foods. Thank you, Adae, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Oh, there I go. Yes, thank you. So, Guati se hopa hin weka ni me esa wayat kutite me osuta koi mahada. My name's Adae Romero-Briones, and thank you for the wonderful bio. I am half Kiowa and half Cochiti. Next slide, please. I grew up in both of these places, and I say that because it informs some of the work that we do at First Nations, as does all people's views on how to interact with nature and the world is pretty much dependent on upbringing. And so it should never be understated, our introductions and where we come from and what people we're representing, because that informs like how we envision our world and envision our solutions. And so this is just a little bit about where I come from currently. Next slide, please. I'm married to this man with the big fish. This is my husband, Fred Briones, who is born and raised in the California Delta, where I currently reside, and I'm currently broadcasting from Lodi, California, which is also the place where we have our headquarters for the California Office for First Nations Development Institute. My husband is both Miwok and Pomo from Big Valley Rancheria. And so this is why I'm in California, followed love. That's our son there. And I speak to you from the shores of the Mokelumne River, and the Mokelumne Miwok people once occupied this land, and they're part of my story. So next slide, please. Because we're talking about Sacramento and the Delta, my husband and I both reside in the Delta. And I have to say, like, this is when we're talking about regenerative agriculture and we're talking about the future of our country, this is a pretty important place. I consider this place ground zero for the conversations about climate change and agriculture and carbon sequestration, because when we look at the historical record, Sacramento, of course, Sutter's Fort, the place of the discovery of gold, and the California Delta was really the place where we see a lot of historical narratives about the tensions between progress and conservation, right? And in those, so really this is the birthplace of not only industry, it's also the birthplace of environmental conservation. And in both those conversations, Indigenous peoples are pretty absent. And in fact, Indigenous people probably bear the brunt of the brutality of these conversations, in that while industry and environmental conversation were battling out about who would create policies that would affect the future of America, not only California, Indigenous people at the time were being, brutalized, genocide. It's a pretty disturbing history. And it all happened here, right? It started here in Sacramento. It started in the Delta. And what we can take from that is that the alteration of the Delta and its life has really affected how not only California views carbon sequestration, agriculture, industrialization, and conservation, but America. And there's in fact, America then is a leader in the world. So I think when we talk about regeneration, we talk about carbon sequestration, we talked about the historical narrative, I feel like we are all in ground zero when we're talking about these very important topics. Next. Yes. And so right now it's October, end of October, beginning of November, and we're talking, we have a picture of the salmon here because, the California Delta is a pretty special place in that we're waiting for the salmon to run. They haven't run yet. They could be running at any time now. This is their season. But what does salmon, we hear a lot about that in California, and we hear a lot about dams, and we hear a lot about the tensions between Indigenous people and the removal of dams in agriculture. Well, we have to remember that California is one of the most fertile has some of the most fertile agricultural soils because of the salmon nation, right? We're sitting on hundreds of generations of salmon who have made it up the rivers from the Delta, from the Klamath, from others all throughout California that eventually died and made their way back. You know, their bodies became the soil that we now grow, like this billion-dollar industry that feeds America. Next slide, please. And so when we're talking about food and agriculture and regenerative agriculture, and we're talking about what are ways that we can re-envision an agricultural food society, I get to work with some of the most amazing people probably on all the earth. I run the Native Agriculture and Food Systems Initiative. So I support 365 different projects. We are grantors, so we financially support these projects. We've spent over $9 million on supporting Indigenous projects, not only in California, but throughout the mainland, Alaska and Hawaii. And so the question I always get is like, what is the difference between a mainstream food system and an indigenous food system? And of course, I went through my introductions and I showed you some of the places that I've come from, but we asked our grantees the same question. And these are some of the points that came up. And we have grants in all of these areas. And so when we think about a mainstream food system doesn't necessarily think of ceremony or artistry or water or waste or their hunters and harvesters or even the animals as part of their food system. But an indigenous food system really needs all of these components in order to be healthy. And so when we're talking about food economies and we're talking about capital, we're talking about all these areas that include artistry, that include cooks, that include farmers markets, that include infrastructure and institutional kitchens and waste, right? One of the key components in a lot of our work is looking at how waste is operationalized in the food economy. And lo and behold, most indigenous food systems have zero waste. And when I say zero waste, I mean zero waste, and that everything is utilized and either recirculated or it's repurposed for something else. Next slide, please. And so you saw the components of a native food system. So now we're talking about like, what is the relationship of food to the rest of society? And again, the question is like, what is an indigenous perspective and how does it differentiate from a mainstream food perspective? And so throughout the work, we came out with this nifty graphic, and really it describes the differences between how an indigenous person views food, right? If we look at the roots of the entire system, we see there's this area called collective resources. And that's pretty problematic in the mainstream food system, right? Where land can be commodified, where water can be commodified, where fish can be commodified, and even people can be commodified. And it's actually attached to a dollar sign. In the indigenous food systems, there are things that cannot be commodified, and they're considered collective resources such as land, energy, water, environment, and individual health. Like those things are collective resources and therefore collectively managed. And in order to collectively manage those resources, you need a whole bunch of skill sets. So it's not unnormal to go into an indigenous community and see people that have so many skill sets, wear so many hats on a daily basis. In a mainstream food system, you have very specialized skill sets. You have engineers that focus on engineering. You have hydrologists that focus on water. You have farmers who only focus on food, and it's very compartmentalized. And what happens is the measures of how that management happens is either individually by the mainstream food system or by the community. How well is the community doing? And the food is basically connected and rooted in our societal institutions, political, social, educational. But in a mainstream food system, the only way to access food is if you have the monetary resources to actually purchase the food. So it really creates this barrier on how well a food system is doing. So in an indigenous food system, we need the food to be able to understand when our institutions are failing. But when you put that barrier of food, you really can't, right? It only tells us that somebody doesn't have enough resources to make those purchases, but it doesn't tell us much of anything else about the actual failure of the institutions. So it's a great food in an indigenous system is a societal measure and a societal gauge on how well the entire society is doing. Next slide. I think that's okay. So that was just a little bit of background in like some of the work we do and some of the processes that we work through with a lot of our indigenous grantees. We're in Lodi, California. And when we talk about carbon and we talk about sequestering carbon and we talk about regenerative agriculture, you can't really talk about those things if you don't bring in the perspective of altering waterways. We can't talk about regeneration if we don't talk about deforestation. And really when we see all of those things happening is at the time of conquest and colonization. And so one of my biggest messages around regenerative agriculture is that you have to talk to indigenous people because you have to understand what these systems were like prior to those points in our history. And again, we're in Sacramento, I'm in the Delta. These are the places where like we first see some of the major effects of agriculture and deforestation and altering of waterways. And in fact, those same historical behaviors play out today. So there's a lot of actions that we can take collectively, especially in this area, to address those very important issues around climate change, carbon sequestration. And for my last point, I'll say that some of the most carbon intact soil is being managed by indigenous people throughout the world. So when we think of indigenous lands, we should be thinking of carbon. And when we think of carbon and indigenous lands, we should be thinking about the protection of those lands in indigenous hands. And we should also be looking at ways to increase indigenous ownership of the lands that are not in ownership. And with that, I will pass it to the next person. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adae. As I said when we started this panel, we have got a powerful lineup, and that was a wonderful way to kick it off. Our next speaker, unfortunately, will not be here in person, but we have a video that he has recorded for us. So it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Toensmeier. Eric is the award-winning author of Paradise Lot and Perennial Vegetables and the co-author of Edible Forest Gardens. He's an appointed lecturer at Yale University, a senior biosequestration fellow with Project Drawdown, and an international trainer. He has studied useful perennial plants and their roles in agroforestry systems for over 2 decades. He is the author of The Carbon Farming Solution, a global toolkit of perennial crops and regenerative agriculture practices for climate change mitigation and food security. So Moise, if you could cue up the video, and after the video, he sent us a couple slides, and Goli will talk through those slides after the video.
Hi, my name is Eric Toensmeier, and my little piece for Future Food today will be on carbon farming. Thanks very much for having me. All right. What's carbon farming? Well, it's a set of practices, and there are tens or hundreds of these that sequester carbon and store it in agricultural soils and in the perennial biomass of trees and grasses and other perennial plants. They take the extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is a problem causing climate change, and they remove some of it and store it. They can keep doing that for several decades until they get full, And it's stored there, hopefully for a good long time, unless they go back to the previous practices that weren't as good, or the land dries out, or there's a big fire or something. So it's not a completely secure storage, but it's a good storage. And it's also worth noting that we want to reduce emissions from agriculture, which is a big problem from agriculture as well. We don't just want to sequester carbon, but also reduce emissions. Potential impact is big. At Project Drawdown, we found that the food sector, which includes agriculture and also the reduced demand for food through diet change and reduced food waste, was the largest impact of any sector compared to electricity, transport, anything. 6 agricultural practices were in our top 20 practices with the biggest impact. For example, silvopasture, which is combining trees with pastures, has more impact, a greater impact than rooftop solar. So agriculture has big potential. A couple of fun practices to look at. Organic no-till, which is picking up speed in the United States, is still very new. It's being done on small scale farms very successfully, and at the mechanized scale, there are some new techniques, as you can see in that photo, that have been worked out with roller crimpers and other things to kind of get the best of both worlds of reducing tillage, so we're not turning over the soil and exposing all the carbon to head back into the atmosphere again, but having the great organic matter gains of organic production. We have tree intercropping, where in this case you're combining deciduous trees that leaf out in the summer, drop their leaves in the winter, with winter grains that start growing in the fall, grow through the winter, and then are harvested in the spring. So they're not really, they're occupying the same space, but not really at the same time in terms of competing for light. Those are big commercial systems in Europe and China. And then silvopasture, as I mentioned, which is trees combined with livestock. Now, and anytime you're mixing trees with livestock or trees with annual crops, it has to be the right species of trees and the right forages and the right annual crops and the right spacing between those things, or you get competition. But if you do it right, you get yield gains and really outstanding carbon. Here's an example. They asked if I would just show a little something about our garden. On the top left is what it looked like when it started. And on the bottom is what it looks like now. We've been here about 16 years and really seen a tremendous gain in soil organic matter, in living biomass, in food production, in biodiversity, in water holding capacity, and so on. And there's lots of practices that are worth doing in California. I'll mention a few: cover cropping and organic production, conservation agriculture, which is a mix of reduced tillage, cover crops, and crop rotation, and tree intercropping. There's perennial crops like tree crops, not always appropriate, as we know, in terms of water, but excellent in terms of carbon. Multi-strat agroforestry, which is multiple layers. We're starting to see a little bit of avocado with coffee in parts of California, and perennial grains, which are basically still under development, but being worked on. There's 1 or 2 that are starting to come out. For livestock, we have ordinary managed grazing, which is just about kind of getting the stocking rates right and stuff. Adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which is fancy grazing, and silvopasture, which is grazing with trees. And sustainable land management more broadly. In California, there's this amazing tradition of indigenous land management using fire and other kinds of practices, which has been classed as a kind of agroforestry. So getting native people back on the land in California is a big potential impact. We found that at Drawdown as well, and other kinds of restoration of degraded land. So that is the very short version, and I hope you all have an excellent event. I will stop share. And
if you could cue up the first of the 3 slides, please, Moise.
So there's just a few slides I just wanted to. This is for those of you who may want to turn your backyard into a carbon farming oasis. I recommend his book, which is basically turning an empty lot, as you saw in his pictures, into a permaculture heaven. Then the second slide is one of his examples in his book, Carbon Farming. If you could, next slide, please. And this is that example of, this is in Veracruz. The farm is called Las Cañadas. And they use multiple techniques that Eric mentioned, climate mitigation techniques such as growing annuals with perennials, growing annuals and perennials together in polycultures. There's a limited number of dairy cows grazing under native alder trees, because initially when they started, they were just basically doing, had a lot of cows and such, and the land got degraded, so they got a lot of lessons in permaculture, and they were able to plant in those areas native trees to restore the land. And then next slide is just a beautiful overview of that Las Cañadas farm I wanted to share from his book. Let's see, in this, the many sustainable practices employed at Las Cañadas, they also sequester carbon, and they are producing basically food, fodder, materials, chemicals, and energy. The cooperative has also planted highly diverse bosque comestible, which is an edible forest of various species in a system called multi-strata agroforestry, and which is the gold standard of biodiversity and carbon sequestration in agriculture. Okay, back to you, Christy.
Thank you, Goli.
Sure.
If you could introduce the next slide, please. Okay. Our next speaker, Brian Shobe, is the Associate Policy Director at California Climate and Agricultural Network, or CalCAN. Brian began his agriculture career in 2009 on his grandparents' farm in North Dakota and has been involved with sustainable agriculture and community food security work ever since. Prior to CalCAN, he served as the program coordinator and government resources advisor at the Farmer Veteran Coalition, where he advised beginning farmers and advocated for their policy priorities. Brian received a year-long Emerson National Hunger Fellowship, during which time he worked with the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona and the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Brian has a bachelor's degree in sociology from Beloit College and farming experience in 3 states. Thank you, Brian, for being with us tonight. And if you could switch to Brian's presentation, please.
Great. Oh, this is so fun. Thanks, Christy, for the introduction and setting this up. It's true that by day I work for the California Climate and Agriculture Network, but tonight I actually just want to speak to you all as an individual and as a fellow 350 SAC member, as well as someone who comes from a family that's been farming for at least 300 years. If you can go to the next slide, Moise. This is my proof. This is actually a picture of me on my grandparents' farm where I spent a lot of time growing up. I'm the little one in the purple shirt. So those are my roots. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So Goli asked me to talk about regenerative agriculture in California. So I'm going to quickly cover 3 facts and 3 actions you can take to support regenerative ag. The first is that regenerative agriculture is not new. It's a new term that seems to have sort of been catchy, but like carbon farming or climate smart agriculture, they're all just used to describe land management practices that have actually been around for a long time. So as Adae referenced, Indigenous Californians have long used such practices. And if you're interested in learning more about Indigenous land stewardship and food systems, I strongly recommend a report that Adae actually co-authored and I read recently. I think Moise is going to drop it into the chat. That report's called Recognition and Support of Indigenous California Land Stewards, Practitioners of Concentric Ecology. Of course, Black, Asian, and Latinx farmers have also long been at the forefront of agricultural innovation in California. The tragic reality for all of these land stewards is that they've been subject to state-sanctioned land theft and discrimination in our state's history. So as both Adae and Eric mentioned, one of the best ways to support food systems that are good for the climate is to support land transfers and other forms of reparations for Indigenous Californians and other California farmers of color. Let's go to the next slide. So second, every farmer I know personally is concerned about climate change and genuinely wants to be the best steward of their land that they can be. And like all of us, they're also trapped in an exploitive, extractive capitalist system that forces them to constantly cut costs and compete to remain in business. It's important to remember that the vast majority of farms in California are still small and mid-scale, family owned and operated. Most of them are forced to rely on a second job off the farm in order to make ends meet for their families. Many are renting their land because they can't afford to buy it, which also makes it hard to invest in long-term stewardship. And we are losing these farms at an alarming rate. Between 2012 and 2017, California lost 10% of its farms, mostly in that small and mid-scale category. So these are just some of the reasons it's so hard for farmers to invest in climate smart ag practices, which often have long-term returns on investment. That's why they need incentives, technical assistance, and systems change to help them overcome these barriers. So to scale up regenerative agriculture, we need to stop seeing farmers as villains and instead see them as allies in need of support. One of the reasons the Green New Deal received such pushback from agricultural groups is because it initially only treated farmers and ranchers as part of the problem, instead of treating them as allies and partners in the solution. So to pass bold, comprehensive climate legislation like the Green New Deal, which we absolutely need, we can't afford to make that mistake again. Of course, more locally, you can also use your purchasing power to support farms and ranches that, despite all the odds, are finding ways to raise food in ways that are good for the climate. And if we can go to the next slide. So these farms in our local area include the Moa the Moa family farm in the top left, the Cloverleaf farm in the top center, Molly Taylor from PT Ranch in the top right, and Dan Winterport farm in the bottom left. These are all farmers and ranchers who sell at the Sunday farmers market under the freeway, and all use organic and regenerative practices. Or if you shop at the co-op, you can buy all organic produce, including for farmers like Road and Ward Burrows, who are in the center at the bottom, or Javier Zamora of JSM Organics on the bottom right. These are all amazing people and farmers who deserve our support. All right, so next slide. So finally, I want you to really believe that an agricultural system that sequesters more carbon than it releases helps us achieve carbon neutrality and eventually even can help us reverse climate change, all while protecting farm workers, purifying our air and water, and ensuring healthy habitat for pollinators and other wildlife is entirely possible. We have all of the knowledge of the practices we need to do that. But to achieve the scale of change we need at the pace we need, which is on the order of over 10 million acres in California by 2030, we need policy change. So to put that in context, California has invested so far in the last 5 years or so, $325 million in over 1,500 climate smart ag projects to date. But this has just barely scratched the surface. Remember that California has 70,000 farms. Which brings me to the last takeaway. If you want to support regenerative agriculture, vote for candidates who advocate for policies and systems change that makes it easier for Indigenous Californians and all farmers to make a living while protecting our air, land, and water for the next generation. And to be clear, I mean candidates at all levels. And I took off my professional hat so I can say this next part without getting into trouble. Greg Fishman, if elected to the County Board of Supervisors, could help us prevent a new 4-lane highway from being built between Elk Grove and Folsom, which would single-handedly help to protect thousands of acres of farmland in our county. If you haven't voted or volunteered for Greg yet, I hope you do so. Similarly, Mai Vang, a candidate running for city council, would be another champion alongside Katie Valenzuela for urban agriculture and local food systems. If you haven't voted or volunteered for Mai yet, please do so. In sum, you can do 3 things to support scaling up food systems that are good for the climate. Support land transfers and other forms of reparations for California tribes and farmers of color. 2, see farmers as allies in need of our support and support them with your dollars whenever you can. And 3, vote for candidates at all levels of government who support policies and systems change that make it easier for farmers to do what they what most of them want to do, which is adopt practices that are good for the climate and for the next generation of farmers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brian. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Mary Kimball, wonderful. Farmers prefer their carbon in the soil is what the last slide said. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Mary Kimball, Executive Director of the Center for Land-Based Learning. She has been with the nonprofit since 1998 and has led its growth from one program and 30 high school students to 5 different model programs in more than 25 California counties, including the California Farm Academy, the only beginning farmer training business incubator and apprenticeship program of its kind in Northern California. Mary has served on local, regional, and statewide groups. She holds a master's degree in human and community development from Ohio State University and a bachelor's of science from UCD in agriculture science and management. Welcome, Mary.
Well, hello. It's so incredibly great to be a part of this panel. I've already learned so much. And I'm going to take off my hat too and say with what you just said earlier, Brian, which is that my Vang, and she actually is a graduate of our high school youth programs, the SLUES program and the FARMS program. And we are huge, huge, huge advocates for Mai, and of course, because as you said, her focus on urban agriculture as well. So thanks for talking about Mai, which actually leads me right into a little intro of the Center for Land-Based Learning and our West Sacramento Urban Farm Program, which I'm here to talk to you about this evening. So Center for Land-Based Learning has been around as an organization since 2001, but as programs since 1993. We started with the high school age group, and our focus is on sustainable agriculture and connecting youth to their food systems, as well as to the many opportunities that exist in agriculture and environmental sciences. Since that time, we've grown a great deal. And one of the things we started in 2011 is a beginning farmer training program called the California Farm Academy. And in 2012, we started an incubator program, a farm business incubator program, going back to that land access issue that Adae talked about. The need for many young people who do not have access to land of their own, connecting them to opportunities. And we did that not just in rural areas, but in urban areas as well. And we connected with the city of West Sacramento, who actually invited us to come to the city and create a program. These are some of the faces of our first and second year of that incubator program. It's now 6 years old. And you'll be hearing from one of our current incubator farmers, Alfred Melbourne, in just a bit. And that person in the middle on the bottom, Amy Sisson, she was one of our first incubator farmers, and she's the brand new public health officer for Yolo County. So you can see how there's so many different interactions here between the work that we do and community health and benefit. So next slide, please. So this was our first location in West Sacramento, 5th and C Farms. It is at the corner of 5th and C. It is a city-owned property, and it had been vacant for over 20 years. It at one point was a gas station. It had a cleanup, and it just sat there as a vacant lot with weeds and a lot of other unsightly things. So that's where we started. I think today there's so many great things to talk about with urban agriculture, but when we were thinking about climate change, I wanted to highlight really 5 different areas with where urban agriculture can have a major role. And the first is exactly what you're seeing here, which is vegetation. Vegetation is essential for limiting city warming effects. Obviously, the majority of our population live in cities, and the majority of our climate issues are from cities, and we need areas that really decrease the temperature. And you can imagine the more of these kinds of places we have in our communities, not just parks, but literally places where we can farm, at any scale. And there's lots of land out there. You'd be surprised as you drive around and look around in your communities of where we can be doing these kinds of projects. So that's number one, is this opportunity to limit our city warming effects. Next slide, please. Another area that's so critical, and Alfred is in this picture, is to make our food systems more resilient. Climate-related disasters, of course, are only unfortunately going to increase. And especially our cities, as we saw with COVID, are highly vulnerable to already existing supply chain disruptions. They're going to even be exacerbated. So how does urban agriculture help with that? Well, it's right in your own community. You have the ability to go and get your food from your local farmer, or to be growing it yourself in an urban area. These communities especially are already at greatest risk, and they have the least amount of resources, and they're mostly already food insecure communities. So the more that we can have urban agriculture in these communities, the more resilience we will build. We need a local food supply, and our urban farms give us this opportunity. The third area, and I'll just stay here on this slide, is biodiversity islands. We think about habitat, and we think about habitat loss at great scales across the state of California. I think today we only have about 3% of our historic wetlands, for example, that we had in California. But we've also had a great deal of habitat loss, of course, in our cities. And so what a great way to bring back those islands of biodiversity, as many of our urban farmers do, by adding in some of those perennial crops that was talked about earlier. Several of our urban farms, we have planted native trees, shrubs, grasses, and forbs, and those not only sequester carbon, which is important, but probably more importantly at this scale, is that they are biodiversity islands. So they give the opportunity for beneficial insects, for pollinators, obviously mammals, birds, all sorts of creatures to have places to live, to breed, and obviously to have habitat for them to do those things. Flowers, many of our farmers include flowers as a part of their urban farms, which again, so important for our pollinators especially. And we know how difficult things have been for our pollinators for a long time, including, of course, even just European honeybees, which are not native to here, but are still so critical to our food system. And what this picture shows, kind of number 4, is community education. You know, we need this next generation, right? And they're already doing such an incredible job, way better than my generation or generations before, about making change and being the change for what we need to do in the future around climate mitigation. But things like these urban farms are literally the learning laboratories that our communities can be a part of and our youth can be a part of. These young children who are coming across the street from their schools to learn at Cummins Way Farm, for example, where Alfred is, and many other people who are coming out on tours, they're learning that they can have an impact, that this knowledge for them is power, and that their actions can make a difference. We need all of that in our communities to do what we need to do for the future. And urban farms give us that hands-on opportunity right in our own communities to see how food is produced, be a part of it, and learn that we can make change. Next slide. The other thing that I'll bring up, and I think Brian brought up this too with the food co-op, is in West Sacramento alone, we've seen just tremendous support from 2 of our local grocery chains, Raley's and Nugget, and they are supporting our urban farmers by buying directly from them. We have worked over time to develop those relationships, But the great news is they have embraced it, and you can go into those grocery stores in West Sacramento and you can buy from many local farmers that we have helped support and incubate. Next slide, please. This is Glenn Baldwin with 6 O'Clock Farm. He started as an incubator farmer, actually in West Sacramento at our Lake Washington site, which is directly across from Nugget there and Pheasant Club, if you know that area. And now he's bought his own farm. And he is farming 100% of the time, which is an incredible accomplishment, especially for an urban farmer, and producing food directly for those 2 grocery stores, which we're so proud of. And one more slide. And this is our future in West Sacramento and hopefully beyond. We want to bring the local food to more communities in West Sacramento so that they have access all year long to this great, healthy, fresh food. And again, that then our urban farmers can thrive and we can continue to create more urban farms in West Sacramento and beyond. So look for the launch of our mobile farmers market in 2021. We had hoped to do it in 2020, but COVID got in the way, and our mobile farmers market truck, which looks like this, but with our own wrap, will be arriving later this year. So thank you very much. And again, I really appreciate being a part of this panel.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I'm personally really looking forward to that mobile farm stand. That's really exciting. All right, so next up we have farmer Alfred Melbourne. He is the owner and operator of Three Sisters Gardens and a longtime resident of West Sacramento. Three Sisters Gardens is a nonprofit organization bringing community members together to grow food and lives. Their mission is to teach at-risk youth how to grow, harvest, and distribute organic vegetables and engage the community to get involved in supporting the at-risk youth population in Yolo County. Welcome to Alfred, and if you could please cue up his slides.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. Yeah, true pleasure to be on this panel, to be speaking about the important topics of food sovereignty, land back, of course, carbon sequestration. Yeah, just glad to be here. Yeah, I'm the founder and director of Three Sisters Gardens, which is a nonprofit organization based in West Sacramento. Kind of like the most unlikeliest of farmers, having just seen a need and tried to find a way to engage the youth in our community. There's a lot of talk going on about a climate crisis, and see not a lot of movement when it comes to getting the work done. And it's hard work, but I mean, having to engage and really educate yourselves. For someone like myself, having to fall back on native and indigenous knowledge and become a caretaker of the land, following the steps of our ancestors, and of course giving respect and honor to the native Miwok, Nisenan, Maidu, Kunkau, many California tribes that have been the caretakers of this land for time immemorial. So definitely want to give an acknowledgement to the Cali Rose and sisters. But so what we're doing, yeah, is we're working we're definitely working with the Center for Land-Based Learning and West Sacramento Urban Farm Project, as well as kind of finding other areas where we can acquire land, because land, of course, being at a premium, and being natives, not having land, of course, trying to find opportunities where we can. But what we do have is an Urban Farm Youth Leadership Development Program, where we take on youth from the community and we give them opportunities, train them, teach them about growing, seeding, seed collection, and both maintenance and then harvesting of plants. So just trying to create opportunities where we can have safe spaces for the youth to come out and come into contact with the earth and just reconnect with nature, basically. So yeah, we have 4 spaces actually in West Sacramento, and just trying to create that resiliency that we know is needed in an area like ours, because we have been designated a food desert. So trying to create access to food and the knowledge of the nutrition so that we can put it into the place where it's needed the most, because we know that if you provide better food, better opportunities, people are going to benefit from that. We'll have test scores will go up and behavioral problems will go down. So tied in with connecting back with the land, getting educated about our nutrition and indigenous and native pathways so that we can keep our youth positively engaged and out of the criminal injustice system. So yeah, it's been a really fun time for us, kind of reconnecting and finding our way. Can you show another slide, please? I know that I'd like to get something of a next one, please. So as soon as we can get one of the, well, that's our 4th and C Street site that you see right there. And that's one of the lots that we started on. So originally a vacant lot in Broderick, California. And we've been able to transform that and over time produce hundreds of pounds of vegetables, engaging the youth within our community, teaching them these native and indigenous ways to intercrop the corn, beans, and squash, of course, which is the name of Three Sisters Gardens. But once again, as Mary Kimball was speaking about this decreasing, where we have the heat within the cities, the city warming effects. So as we transform a lot of these environments, we're understanding, and we know, falling back on our native indigenous knowledge, to connect with the land and grow with it, so that we can continue to thrive, create these ecological kind of climates, some small bioclimates where we have just a bunch of areas thriving with insects and birds, and bringing the life back, and of course regenerating the soil as much as possible, keeping it, all the microorganisms and biology thriving. So, but it's definitely it's been a challenge, of course, with a lot of the different things going on right now, mainly the fires most recently, and trying to keep the youth engaged in our program. But definitely been producing a bunch of food and finding ways to distribute. We hope that we are a 501c3 nonprofit, that we can get some awareness and some support to continue to find ways to get our budget approved, so we can fund some of our staff and find ways to get some more of our youth paid throughout the summers to come, so that, you know, we're engaging them and we're taking their time seriously. They're getting trained, and different levels of kind of advancement. We hope to continue working with the Center for Land-Based Learning and get our youth to apply for the Farm Academy through the Center for Land-Based Learning, because we understand that it is an awesome program. Definitely been a blessing for us to be able to walk into their program with the knowledge that we have and start 2 farms. So if this is Cummings Way Farm that you guys see right here, and it's been our second space with the Center for Land-Based Learning. Actually, this was our first space with the Center for Land-Based Learning. But if you want to change the picture, maybe we'll get something from above, give you guys a different vantage point. But okay, back up one if you don't mind. Nope. So, well, here we go. So this is the 5th and C Street. This is what Mary was talking about, where Center for Land-Based Learning originally started with the West Sacramento Urban Farm Project. And this is what we've been able to do in a season. If you go one more, you'll get a further aerial view. And well, we're all over the place, but we have a Cummings Way Farm. So the city of West Sacramento, and that's one of the corners that we've been able to transform. Of course, we had a lot of help from the beginning. The soil was worked, cover crop had been in place, of course. So our practices being bio-intensive no-till, deep carbon sequestration. We want to keep that carbon in the soil. As I was saying earlier before us, the plants need it. The air doesn't out in the atmosphere. Of course, we're trying to do our part to inform, educate the youth so that they understand these practices. Of course, keeping our food source local so that we could limit all the emissions and definitely build the resiliency from within. So if you go to the next picture, I think, and then just, yeah, Cummings Way Farm, that's another view. And that's what we've been partnering there with other farmers. Again, that's a nice aerial view of Three Sisters Gardens, Cummings Way Farm right there in the middle. Next slide, please. Oh, nope, too far. All right, well, it looks like that's about all the pictures that we have. Appreciate you guys giving us the opportunity to speak on food sovereignty, land back, Native Indigenous knowledge. Definitely, if anyone wants to support us, you can go to threesistersgardens.com and offer support. Appreciate the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Alfred. Okay, so next up, I am pleased to introduce Sean Eakins, the new General Manager of Sacramento Natural Food Co-Op. Sean has more than 25 years of grocery experience. He's held leadership positions at New Leaf Community Markets in Half Moon Bay, Winter Ridge Natural Foods in Sandpoint, Idaho, and Buy Right Market in San Francisco. In addition, he's been in management roles at Sprouts, Poor Old Weber's Land and Sea, and Sam's Club. Sean has a strong background in store operations and brings a ton of energy and passion to Sacramento Natural Foods Co-op. He is in the grocery business because he wants to make a difference in people's lives by providing access to healthy foods and encouraging sustainable choices within our food system. Sean is a firm believer in engaging with community and local farms and has thoughts on how to increase their presence within the co-op. At the same time, he's aware of the goal to succeed as a sustainable business that reaches as many people as possible. Thank you so much for joining us, Sean.
Thank you, and I can say I am humbled to be a part of this group. I appreciate you having me on. You know, and I think before we go into my slides, I was going to touch on a more boring topic, but something I think that's important to our business is just the refrigeration side of it, and then I'll jump into my slides. And I just wanted to highlight our RSI climate partner that helped us set up the refrigeration here. The cool thing with them is when climate being part of their name, they view refrigeration on a much more holistic, you know, than conventional refrigeration. And what that does for us, they've been able to reduce our energy, make it more efficient. We save 41% more energy with the systems we use than a conventional system. They also decrease our horsepower that we need to operate our systems with the styles that we use. It's called the Forticool variable speed. That saves us 29.6% horsepower. And finally, it just it reduces our service calls, which obviously are usually a call because it is leaking refrigerant, which we do not want in the atmosphere, even if we are using greener gases these days. And I can tell you, having been in the grocery business for many years, refrigeration is usually a major part of our cost and the cause of many headaches. And we do not see that here, knock on wood, that doesn't change me talking about it. But you can move forward in the slides. I did just want to touch on some of the impacts that we've been able to you know, realize this year and our fiscal year just ended. You know, you can see the numbers that we've been able to move. And ReSoil Sacramento is one of our partners, and I know also on this panel as well, David. But what we're going to do that's not quite as, I guess it could be self-explanatory, but a green team is something we're going to create here at the store. Again, that was something I think was on the table for 2020, and you know, as many have mentioned, COVID kind of put a back burner on that, but we've got some extremely passionate and talented team members here that we want to have more engaged with how do we save even more? How do we divert even more landfill, our product out of the landfill? How do we get more to the soil reclamation? I think we've got a lot of people, a lot of great ideas, and I think it always is more impactful when the staff work together to engage and inspire everybody. I think obviously we're, you know, to me, I'm trying to continue the pathway of this being the next best thing to a farmer's market, you know, short of being a, you know, publicly traded company where we're owned by the community here. I think containers, you know, obviously with COVID, for those of you that shop, you've noticed our hot and cold bars are empty. We have other things filling in. So we're working on containers and what we use, shifting the glass for grab and go soups. We're working on in the near future, if you've had our fresh squeezed orange juice, going from plastic bottles to possibly doing a program like you see with some of the milk providers like Strauss, right? It's a deposit and we bring those glass bottles back so we can reuse those post pandemic. The other thing we want to get into is we want to transition into a B Corp, which will then create even more urgency to continue to get better, also create a measure for us on how we are doing with our, you know, everything that we do inside, from treatment of the community to staff and how we divert products. I think it'll be a good measure, and every other year we're going to have to take a harder test to see how we're doing each year. So, and then finally, I think, you know, I mentioned on it the recycled plastic packaging. We've shifted to with our value-added programs that were also out of necessity from pulling certain programs due to COVID. At least we've been able to find some packaging that is post-consumer recycled plastic to still ultimately get the product to people that come here to the store. If you could move to the next slide. Make Every Day Earth Day has been another one that was affected by COVID, but you can see the results since 2004. We've been able to donate almost $200,000 to 19 different organizations just by simply using a reusable bag. I think you know, we should be starting that back up here in the near future. But again, another impact on us this year with COVID, but a great program that I'm excited to get back going again. You can pop to the next slide. This is where I think we really help impact our local community here with farms, and, you know, and thank you to everybody that's spoken so far, that we've been able to work with farmers that have learned from, are part of, or work in the Delta. I mean, we have a number of farms we've worked with for the last 40 plus years, and you can see the sales of organics and what that percent looks like. Again, this year that was impacted because of the shift to some of the products that have been the focus of purchasing. But again, that's our goal, to get that back up and to continue to be a huge percent of what our business is and what our sales come from. And if you go to the next slide, you'll kind of see this is where we really affect the transportation piece, is by buying locally. You know, 41% of our sales coming locally. Local for us is within 150 miles. It's not 500 or 800 miles like some competitors out there, and we truly talk local. And you can see just, you know, we have 874 local vendors and producers, and that's growing. And some of you on this panel, I may be reaching out to if we're not already doing something together, and see what we can do as well. So, but I think, you know, local is great. I live about 100 yards from 5th and C Farm. That was one of the first things I noticed when I moved in here a few months ago. And so it's exciting to see now put a face to that farm there. So I'll probably be stopping in and saying hi. But again, I appreciate everybody that I've heard so far. It's inspiring. I have all kinds of ideas running through my head, and you know, having moved back here after being gone 10 years, I'm excited to see how much is happening. And Sacramento has changed a lot, and I want to push this cooperative even more into the community than it already is, and, you know, work with everybody here and help in any way we can.
Thank you so much, Sean. Our next speaker, Dell, PE, is an independent chemical engineer. She holds a Master's of Science from the University of California, Berkeley, and is the founder of the Last Beach Cleanup, and a nonprofit organization that collaborates with shareholders and environmental groups on initiatives to reduce plastic pollution. Jan has worked with companies and diverse industries to implement sustainable business and climate resiliency practices in 45 countries. Named as 2019 National Geographic Explorer, Jan is leading the development of the Global Cities Preventing Plastic Pollution program. Appointed by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, Jan was the vice chair of the U.S. Federal Advisory Committee on the Sustained National Climate Assessment in 2016 to 2017. Thank you for joining us, Jan.
Thanks so much, everyone. I am just in awe of what I've been listening to, and I'm trying to figure out how to segue to be Debbie Downer and talk about plastic pollution. I think, first of all, I want to really congratulate 350 Sacramento for your 10-year anniversary. That's really something that you've been working on this for 10 years. And 10 years ago was a different place, and boy, we got at least 10 more years to go. But you know, on your website that you say you're committed to, you know, keeping the carbon content under 350 parts per million and really building equitable solutions. And the title of this whole session tonight is The Future of Food. And what you all have painted is so important to actually creating the positive future of food, because where we are now is just not what we want the future to be. People are so dissociated from where food comes from and what it comes in. And the narrative that you've talked about of getting local to food, seeing where it comes from, having kids see it, taste it, own it, local food is actually critical to stopping plastic pollution. Because next slide, please. This is a sad picture I took in the Brazos River in Texas about a year ago. And it's common everywhere throughout the United States. And in the Bologna River Creek near Long Beach, we'd see this after the first flush. And there's just so much plastic, single-use plastic and packaging that gets used in the name of food that is polluting our environment. And to get back in touch with food and real food is really what we need to go. Next slide, please. So global plastic waste is really increasing. Too much of it has to do with food. We're being told that plastic saves food, is good for the climate, because if we wrap everything in plastic and ship it around the world and put it in cold chains through ships, it's better for all of us. But again, the picture that you painted tonight is the one that is real. And if anything, we've all learned to understand in the last years, we can't have man over nature. We have to be balanced with nature in terms of food and our lifestyles. And this trend is just bad. The amount of plastics being used, again, way too much in food. Next slide, please. My group really tries to bring facts to this discussion, both nationally, internationally, and try to hold companies and governments accountable that recycling is not the solution to how we're going to manage all this plastic waste. And we estimate right now the real plastic recycling rate is under 7%, which is really just not good and shows we won't recycle our way out of this. We absolutely have to reduce using all this plastic. Next slide. And these are just some examples of what, you know, food is being sold in and delivered in is convenient. And it's just, again, so out of touch with the nature pictures that we've seen and where food comes from, and what the balance that we should be in. And all these things are getting labeled as recyclable, but based on our serious comprehensive studies that we've done, they're not. And people can't look at that's how the food delivery can be. And if you see a recycle symbol, it's all okay, I can use plastic. Next slide, please. And so we did a real thorough study, my group, and we published with Greenpeace a survey of what is actually recyclable in America. And the little graphic on the left actually shows all these food service items that are being used: foam packaging, plastic bags, plastic cups, plastic plates, clamshells, plastic trays, plastic lids and caps, cutlery, food wrappers and pouches, and these coffee pods. None of them are actually recyclable by the legal definition. They're not getting accepted into recycling facilities. Nobody wants to buy that plastic. And oh, coincidentally, those are the very same things that are always in the top 10 of our beach cleanups. And so this should just shout out to everybody that this system, the current system of food and food delivery that is promoted society-wide, is not working. Not only is it the delivery of the food from, thousands of miles away and commercial farming or what have you, but it's the packaging that it's coming in as well. Next slide, please. So we worked real hard to come up with practical solutions to what I call getting to the last beach cleanup, because we actually want to get to the place where we don't have to do beach cleanups anymore, right? Or river cleanups, or any cleanups. The world that we should aspire to is actually a world without waste, certainly without plastic waste in our farmlands, in our rivers, in our beaches, and the oceans. What works, what has proven to work, are single-use product bans and fees. Refill systems. I love that truck. I need to come to West Sacramento and see that truck and see the delivery of food, bring the farm to people, hopefully without a lot of packaging. And it's direct to people. And that's a refill kind of reuse system. Actually, they're doing that in Chile. It's quite famous. A group won a big National Geographic award. They are bringing in Chile, really in underserved communities, native communities. They have trucks that bring like cooking oil and things where people can come and refill. They're with the refillable containers. Again, keeping it really local. That's having a big impact. In fact, that little truck is an example of the one from Chile, which is Al Gramo. And it's even hanging in there during the COVID times and working. Material substitutions are something that can also be done. If you have to use a single use, fiber is better. Fiber is keeping carbon in the circulation. All the plastics that are shown here are all plastics that are coming from fossil fuels out into the atmosphere and adding additional carbon, no matter what happens to them, or if they incinerated or they landfilled and so on. It's all net above 350. And then container deposit laws and reverse vending, things like that also help to reduce plastic pollution. And the most exciting coffee cup ever, of course, reusables are the best, but getting back actually to fiber and paper and sustainable forestry, and using that in circulation is at least going to keep our carbon in circulation. So I just like to close again by thanking you a bit, and also saying to all of you, your stories you're telling to the kids, the next future, to every generation around food and where it comes from is so critical, because that way people will look at something coming in plastic and say, I don't want it that way. I want to go get it locally. I want to find it in the farm. I want to find it at the co-op instead. And so it's more than carbon sequestration, even in soils, which is important, but you can also change the narrative on packaging that we don't need. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jan. That was very inspirational and gives us definitely something to think about, to take action. Next, last but not least, I'm pleased to introduce David S. Baker. David was born and raised in Sacramento. After high school, he traveled the country as a competitive cyclist before resuming studies in history and philosophy at Cal Berkeley. Upon returning to the Valley, he worked in various capacities with the Sellin family of restaurants, eventually becoming a neighborhood fixture as wine steward for Sellin's in East Sacramento. It was here that the idea of the Green Restaurants Alliance Sacramento was born. David thought, if Chez Panisse could compost in Berkeley, then why can't we do it here in the Valley? So David, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you and congratulations 350 Sacramento for 10 years. And I'm honored to be here with all these other panelists, many of which I consider compost partners, and the rest I consider mentors. So thank you for that. I'm the director of ReSoil Sacramento, a community compost network. And our aim is to apply regenerative techniques to the suburban landscape. As a community compost network, we talk about compost first as a way to eliminate greenhouse gases from the environment. We say that every 10 pounds is the equivalent of 9.29 miles of driving. So we must liberate all these organic scraps and food waste from the landfill. Secondly, we use all these organic scraps and we collect them and we basically bury them into our landscape to build healthy soils, to build climate resilient landscapes and organic gardens. So, as we all know and are quite aware of, Sacramento is a landscape that is prone to floods and droughts. And floods, droughts, as well as our heat index are all functions of healthy soil. Healthy soil is the foundation for healthy ecosystems. And with that, our main priority is to collect as many organic scraps as we can, and like I said, sow them into Sacramento soils. First slide, thank you. So this is a map of our program. And what we're doing, we work with 22 restaurants, including the co-op, thank you, and including the Water Boy, Magpie, Sellen's family, of course. And those are represented as the green stars on the map. So exactly, I don't know if you can see them. The orange spots and stars are actually the urban farms and schools, as well as residences that we sow the material into. So essentially, we are trying to build healthy soil that can absorb water and be full of the biology that exists within them. So we're essentially sequestering carbon in a sense. I hesitate to say that because I'm not schooled as a soil scientist, but we are taking the carbon that is a part of actually the life and the food scraps themselves and the moisture along with it and putting them into the ground. So far, we started 5 years ago, and thus far we have diverted about 1.3 million pounds to the tune of about we're up to 19,000 pounds a month. With COVID, we were down quite a bit, less than half. And so this program was originated primarily because Sacramento does not have a municipal program. So this is a way, we call it from the ground up or from the bottom up as opposed to the top down, which would be a municipal centralized program like San Francisco's award-winning program. But our program allows us to take action right now. And it's something that we can all do. We can start building up the resilience of our own properties just by taking the food waste that we have and composting it. So what the difference, however, between a decentralized program like ours is that we don't have to take it to a single location like San Francisco's, for instance. They will take that to Fairfield, and a lot of it does not come back to San Francisco. It gets through the market, it gets sold to Napa wineries or other farms up and down the valley, whereas we can take this material and go to disadvantaged neighborhoods and help build up just the greenscapes and the edible landscapes there. So going forward, this is an example of one of our compost parties. This is at the Oak Park Art Garden, and we had a lot of volunteers, and we're right in the middle of 2 hot piles here. Next slide, please. Okay, so our program is designed to run by bicycle in the Midtown area, actually in central Sacramento. So this is an example. This looks like maybe it's hard to tell now, but something collected from the co-op. And just next slide, please. Here we are in front of Solomon's Deli on K Street, doing the rounds. Once again, here we have 2 interns and one of our ACE volunteers. 2 interns from the West Sacramento High School program. Let's see, here we go again, just making the rounds. And so going forward on the future of food, we're looking at, we want to develop new paradigms once the petroleum subsidized industrial food system has been dismantled. And those points, first, I think we'd like to see our culture embrace nature more. So be friendlier with the microbial life that surrounds all of us and encourage it to flourish. As well, borrowing a line from Chef Dan Barber, enlarge our sense of the delicious, namely acquire a taste for sustainable, local, different kinds of foods, coming from indigenous cultures or perennial plants, maybe exotics that just happen to do really well for us here and have a lot of nutrition. There's Jeremiah. Here we also collect from residents. And so we encourage everybody to drop their compost off with us at either 2 Sacramento markets, or sign up for our residential pickup program, or learn how to compost yourself, which we can help with. There's a few tricks to it, but we like to say nature does it itself, and we try to go as au natural as we can. Here we are, moving heavy objects in a way that requires as little lifting as possible. So we've had to just create procedures that everybody can handle so that we can maneuver these things into farms, backyards, and then out of restaurants, of course. Lastly, I see a future just full of victory gardens and urban gardens and permaculture food forests, sidewalk gardens, and just a greenscape in Sacramento. I think we need to tend our land and feed our soil to retrofit our city with nature. And in this way, we can retain our status as the city of trees and the farm to fork capital.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you to all our wonderful speakers. Now we will be transitioning to our question and answer portion of the night, and we are running a little over. If you do need to pop off, and if there's something that you particularly liked and would like to hear more about just let us know. You can contact us via our website, 350sacramento.org. We view this as the beginning of a conversation that we want to keep going. So for our For our question and answer section for the audience, go ahead and address your questions through the live stream chat, and then we will address the panelists as we receive your questions. And our first question is, we're going to just do a lightning round. If all of the panelists could answer in the order that they presented. The first question is, how can the audience get involved with your organization? And so we'll start with Adae.
Yes, I would say visit firstnations.org and kind of look at some of the grantees that we support, but there's a lot of information on there on how you can get involved with our organization.
Great. And how about you, Brian?
Yeah, go to calclimateag.org and subscribe to our newsletter.
Great. And Mary with Center for Land-Based Learning.
Similar to Brian, go to landbasedlearning.org, subscribe to our newsletter. We're also very active on social media, and we do have a volunteer form that's on our website as well that you can fill out for opportunities, especially with our West Sacramento Urban Farm program.
Great. And Alfred?
Yeah, thanks again. So it's at number 3, sistersgardens.com. So you can go on and check out our CSA. You can donate a box to a family, a subscription. You can also just come on out. You know, we're local. If you guys are out in the area, come out and check out our farm, see what we're doing, how we're transforming the landscape and growing a lot of food.
Wonderful. And Sean, how can our listeners or our audience get involved with the co-op?
I mean, obviously coming to the co-op, but if you don't know about cooperative food, I would definitely look at our website and learn more. It's 175 years of history in cooperatives. But become a member, ask questions when you come in, and shop the goods that are local. We're here, and if you want to learn more about who we work with, we have a podcast now called the Co-op Scoop that is now on Apple, Spotify, and a link on our homepage. And we're going to continue to have guests, some of you on our panel, maybe getting a phone call from me soon. So, but another way to learn about what we do and who we work with.
Wonderful. And Jan, how can we get involved with your organization?
Well, you can learn more on the Last Beach Cleanup. .org, and but I just encourage everyone to try to use less plastic packaging, cup, straws, and use less and use refills. They're safe. It's all been proven out. They're safe. Use refills, everyone, please.
Thank you. And finally, David.
Yes, check our website, grasacramento.org, for volunteer opportunities. As well, we welcome anyone to be a part of our carbon cycle, if you will. So bring your compost into us. We'll take that, or start a food forest, and we'll show up at your door when you call.
Thank you. Our first audience question is, I think I'll address it to Brian, but if anyone else wants to jump in, the question is, SMUD was working on sequestration soil mapping for the region. Is an update available on that project, and how can we best support it?
Sure, yeah. I don't know the current status, but I will just address what the report was, because it's useful. It was a report on the sequestration potential of our lands within Sacramento County. And their number one finding was to stop developing and paving over farmland. So I just wanted to highlight that. I know that SMUD is looking at some ways they can utilize their the lands they own or have easements to for sequestration. But I don't know the sort of latest status on some of those ideas and projects.
Thank you.
Great to add to Brian's point there. This is Mary Kimball. Some really great work out of UC Davis in previous years with regards to development. So an acre of developed land, 70 times more climate emissions than an acre of agricultural land. So, and those were some, you know, some amazing soil scientists like Kate Scow and others at UC Davis, but absolutely, that's one of the big solutions, is to stop paving over farmland and wildland areas, our working landscapes.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other points on that question? Okay, so the next question is for Adae. What do you see as the connection between your basket weave work and soil health?
That's one of my most favorite questions. When we think about regenerative agriculture and the cultivation of carbon sequestration, you know, agriculture really focuses on the products of the land, while basket weavers really understand what's below the soil and have worked with roots for generations. And they've cultivated this knowledge that is so beneficial to regenerative agriculture, in that they understand the relationships between what's happening between plants above ground and below ground. So I think that's like really a regenerative concept, is that we really need to include basket weavers in our conversations about regenerative agriculture.
Thank you so much, Adae. This is a funny one. I have this question myself. Are there any tips on dealing with hornets when composting? I think this is for you. I'm sorry.
Let's see. This is David, and I do not have any tips on hornets. We don't get a lot of hornets yet, and I'm lucky for that. Sorry.
Okay, darn it. Well, let's see. The next one is, I'm not sure who to address this to. Was there any legislation supportive of regenerative and carbon farming passed by the California legislation this year?
That would be a good one for Brian. CalCan is very active in policy work.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, thanks for the question. So CalCan does work on the state policy level for incentives for this type of agriculture. I'm racking my brain to go through the last session. It was quite a roller coaster. But I think the unfortunate answer is no. There was neither legislation nor funding given this year due to the pandemic recession. But there has been in the past, and as I mentioned earlier, the state has invested over $300 million in climate smart ag generally. About 50 million of that has gone to 600 healthy soils incentives projects so far. That's in 3 years of the program. So there is state investment that's happening. It's pretty exciting.
And I'll just mention the recent executive order that was signed by the governor 3 weeks ago, actually at our previous home for the Center for Land-Based Learning at the farm on Puda Creek in Winters. And that is nature-based, focused on nature-based solutions to climate change. And it's the beginning of a lot of work that will happen with a lot of stakeholders. And I know that the plan is to engage a lot of different folks who have not been at the table before, including, to your point earlier, Adae, indigenous communities. But the goal there is that 30% of California's land is preserved in a way that is a lot of the things we've been talking about here around climate smart agriculture, around carbon sequestration, around native habitat areas, and all in a voluntary way. So keep your eyes out for that. Many of us are already involved and are really excited to see what the future holds there.
That's great. Thank you for that, Mary. Let's see, the next question, it looks like it's for the co-op. There are many companies which use glass or cardboard packaging, such as mother-in-law kimchi sold at the co-op. Is there a way that the co-op can use its purchasing power to push food manufacturers to get off plastic packaging? And the question was by 2030. We always want to do things quicker than that.
Yes, we do have some things coming up in the near future. I can't speak to some of them yet, but they are, we're constantly looking for new ways to eliminate plastic. And, you know, like I said, this year really put us backwards a little bit, but now it's actually creating more conversations forward and looking for, to Jan's point, plant-based and, you know, fiber packaging, and then also the glass. And I think our product ourselves we're going to do, but we're also, I think we can push a little bit harder on some of the producers that we do carry. So, you know, and the nice thing is when you talk about reusables, our water program up front is our #1 item in our grocery that people refill. It was great that we could get that back going. So hopefully water bottles in the near future might be changing how they look here. So, but stay tuned. We are having those conversations daily. So yes, short answer is yes. And I feel the same, possibly faster than 2030. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next question. Can anyone speak for a minute to the greenhouse gas connection of pesticide use and industrial agriculture?
I don't have enough scientific background there to really do that justice. And sorry, I don't feel qualified to be able to talk about that.
Okay, anybody else? We can move on to the next question.
I can give a really short answer. Most synthetic pesticides are made from fossil fuels. And some pesticides, especially fungicides, tend to be really damaging to soil microbial communities, which negatively impacts soil health and carbon sequestration.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Next question is, how do we support keeping our land wild and the diversity of food?
I'd like to say that we give land back to the native folks, as Adae was mentioning earlier, and getting the natives that actually don't have no land a way to start regenerating and supporting the land that's close and accessible to them. So being able to build up the soil organic matter and replace the ecology as much to native as possible. So to keep all the beneficials and all the little creepy crawlers, the birds and the bees and those good things thriving. So I say give land back to the natives that have been farming and caring for, cultivating and taking care of the land since time immemorial.
Thank you, Alfred. Let's see.
I can add a little bit there, Christy. I certainly agree with Alfred. And then the other piece, which is I kind of mentioned a little bit with the executive order, but Center for Land-Based Learning and many other organizations across the state have been working hand in hand in a voluntary way with private landowners in order to restore biodiversity to the landscape. We term these working landscapes, but the idea really being is that they are producing food, but they are also producing and expanding on our biodiversity. And, you know, as we're talking about here from a climate change perspective, they're also sequestering carbon. There's so many incredible, what we call ecosystem services when you're doing this work. And that takes money, it takes investment. Brian did a great job earlier talking about the challenges that most farmers face just in staying viable. Doing things like this means investment, and it can be in a lot of different ways, but part of it, you know, the difficulty can be, it means oftentimes higher cost food. You know, how do we ensure that these things can happen? Is it government investment? Is it private foundations? There's, you know, these are the kinds of conversations with that executive order that are going to have to happen, because it's going to take a broad swath and it's going to take significant investment to do that. But there's many of us, you know, who want to do it. We're ready to do it. We're doing it in small ways and trying to expand that momentum. And there's a lot of farmers who want to do that. So I just want to share that, as Brian said earlier, we should be seeing farmers as our allies, not as villains, because it's a lot of private land and we can make a big difference.
Thank you so much. I think, Moise, do we have any more questions from the audience? Well, I think we're going to wrap up our evening, and we've already gone over. And thank you to all the panelists for staying longer than planned, for honoring us with your presence, and to Caressa for the land acknowledgement. Many thanks to all of you who participated and do so much for the climate. We also want to give a call out to the volunteers behind the scenes and help prepare for this event: Moise, Goli, Lori, Pat, Tova, Joe, and many others. And to the audience, did we get you fired up? Are you ready to take action? Here are some ideas of some things that you can do. Eat local, join the CSA, shop at a farmer's market or a food co-op. Go to our website, 350sacramento.org, sign up on our mailing list, or find another organization, such as one of the organizations that were here tonight. Volunteer, give them your money. If you have money but not time, give them money. Get involved with intersectional issues. Climate change is systemic change. Make it happen. And we can't tell you as a 501c3 how to vote, but please vote. Your life depends on it, and we're really voting for the climate. And I want to remind our audience, so this is, and thank you for all of the congratulations on the 10th anniversary. It's been a really wonderful month. We've had a series of wonderful events that are all on our website. We've recorded all of these events. So if you go to 350sacramento.org and click on our 10th anniversary link, you can find all of our live stream videos there. And don't forget to join our last event, the Green the Ween. It's a costume and decoration contest. And come show up, show us how you can be scary and sustainable this Halloween to help conserve resources, reduce waste, and send a message. So on the slide, you can see how you can submit your photos and videos. Moise, if you could come back to that slide, the Green the Ween slide. And you can also tag at 350 Sacramento on Instagram with the hashtag Green the Ween. We've extended the contest to Sunday, November 1st at noon. Show off your ghoulishly green and eerily eco-friendly costumes and decorations for our esteemed panel of guest judges. Winners in each of the 5 categories will receive a special edition t-shirt from 350 Sacramento and a gift certificate to Refill Madness. You can find details about that event on our website, and you can also sign up on our website to be on our email list to donate and become a monthly sustainer. Please also visit the website of our presenters tonight and consider getting involved in their organizations. Have a lovely evening, and thank you all for joining us, and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for everybody's efforts.